Hi, everyone. My name is Lizzie Chan, and I'm a member of the CPR Institute's Young Leaders and Alternative Dispute Resolution Steering Committee. I'm delighted to host today's episode of the Corporate Counsel interview series, which is part of the work of the Y-ADR. For those who don't know about the Y-ADR, we're a committee of in-house counsel and external counsel and neutrals. We seek to educate the next generation of young leaders in the ADR field about the full spectrum of dispute resolution and prevention mechanisms. And through the CPR, we seek to give our audience an insider's view into how our community of in-house counsel, external counsel, academics, and experts in the ADR field are using these dispute resolution and prevention mechanisms to manage conflict to enable purpose. And as part of this goal, I have the very fun job of talking to in-house counsel and ombuds and organizations all around the world to ask them about their experience with different ADR mechanisms and to get their advice for young practitioners for moving in-house. And today, I am delighted to welcome Clynton Namuo, who is compliance counsel at MP Materials based in Las Vegas. Hi, Clynton. Welcome to the welcome. We're so delighted to have you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here today.
My first question for you is, can you tell us a bit about your education and your career experience right up to joining MP Materials?
Sure. So I actually did my undergraduate degree in journalism at Boston University, and I spent a number of years as a newspaper reporter covering mostly cops and courts and crime. I loved it. I found that I thrived in a fast-paced, deadline-oriented environment where results matter. My only problem was there was no future in newspaper reporting. As you know, people just don't read newspapers today. What really drew me to it, though, was the court process and watching litigation wind its way through the process. I've watched so many trials. That's what led me to law school. I ended up doing my law degree at Georgia State University College of Law in Atlanta and was recruited in law school by Alston and Bird, a big firm that's based there. I ended up joining their environmental practice in Los Angeles, where my practice focused on complex permitting and litigation in California, essentially getting very large projects built in California and also working on large complex litigation, both in California and across the country. I love that as well, but had the amazing opportunity to join MP Materials earlier this year. I joined in March of 2021 as their compliance counsel here in Las Vegas, and I moved from LA to Las Vegas.
It's so amazing that you've made that pivot from being a journalism to a lawyer. I'd love to ask you a little bit more about MP Materials. Can you tell us a bit about what the company does?
Sure, absolutely. So MP Materials runs the Western Hemisphere's only integrated rare earth mining and processing facility. So it is located in Mountain Pass, California, which is a mine about 1 hour away from Las Vegas. So rare earth minerals are a key ingredient in all of the future technologies that we think about. So they go into wind turbines and electric cars and advanced defense systems. Essentially, rare earth minerals are a group of minerals or elements on the periodic table. They exist really all around us. Ironically, they're not that rare, but what is rare is a large deposit of them in one place. Mountain Pass has one of the largest deposits in the world. What we do is we mine them from the ground, literally take them out of our very large pit, crush them and process them into a concentrate. So we turn it from approximately 8% rare earth mineral, like imagine dirt that's 8% rare earth, and we concentrate it down to 60%. And we are working on the next step in our process, which will be to be able to separate out each constituent rare earth mineral. Those rare earth minerals are then later turned into magnets, and those magnets are what are the key component to all of these future technologies. They are just super powerful magnets that go into things like electric motors and wind turbines.
It's been so helpful to have your explanation of MP Materials and really interpreting something for us that is very technical. And I'm sure that many of us in our everyday use of cars and other goods, we're actually using the rare earth that MP Materials is extracting from the ground.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's, since I joined, I'm all in. I bought my electric car recently. I got rid of my old Camry, and now I have an electric car. So yeah, I'm all about it.
Yeah, that is so fantastic. And I'm interested in the legal function that you have at MP Materials. Can you tell us a bit about your role, the other colleagues that you work with as part of the legal function and the legal matters that you're involved in?
Absolutely. As compliance counsel at MP Materials, I oversee all of our compliance with the vast, a number of environmental laws affecting our site in California. Really, we are heavily regulated industry. We're regulated at the local, state, and federal levels because we just have a very large industrial site. My job is to ensure we are complying with all of those different laws. I also work a lot on contracts here to negotiate and ensure compliance with contracts. We have a legal team of 5 people, so there are 3 lawyers, a general counsel, an associate general counsel who focuses on labor and employment, as well as myself, who focuses on the environmental law. We've also got 2 support staff, a contracts administrator and a paralegal. One thing I will say though, it's MP Materials has actually only been around since 2017. We restarted the mine after it had been shut down, purchased the assets, and restarted the mining and the processing, and we're continuing to refine it and build out our processing facilities. What that means is, since we've only been around for 4 years, we are still really in a startup type mode, and that also means for the legal team, myself included, we do anything that comes across our desk. So it has been a fun learning experience for me.
And it's been really fun for me to learn about the kind of work that you do as well. I think what's unique about MP Materials in our interview series is the startup nature of the company that you work for. And I think it'll be interesting for our audience to understand, what are the kinds of dispute risks that smaller firms are facing, and especially as as their businesses increase. One question I'd like to ask you is whether your company has a preferred dispute resolution mechanism. Of course, understandably, this will depend on who the counterparty is, what is at stake, the commercial relationship. But can you tell us a bit about, any general thoughts you have on what's an appropriate way to resolve the types of disputes that your company may face?
Sure, absolutely. So we obviously prefer to resolve disputes informally and to avoid litigation whenever we can. A lot of that has to do with building relationships with the entities and the companies that we work with. So one of the things that I'll say is, we are regulated by so many agencies. It's important for us to have good relationships with those government agencies, local, state, and federal level. We work a lot with them and make sure to always keep an open dialogue that avoids any disputes going forward. On our contracting side, what I'll say is we have a large industrial site where we have many, many contractors come on site to perform so many different tasks. One way that we use to avoid disputes there is really to come up with a really good contract and a clear scope of work. When we have a clear understanding going in of expectations, what we expect from them and what they expect from us, as well as a fair contract and a fair agreement, that makes the process much smoother. I've definitely seen agreements that are very one-sided, but we don't favor that, because I think when you have something like that, you start off the relationship on a bad foot, and then people will be more likely to want to go to a dispute. If we go to a dispute, which, knock on wood, we don't want to do that. We would like to, resolve that also without litigation, and preferably if we have to, we'd go to mediation before anything else.
That's really interesting about, working with counterparties. And I think you're so right, like the quality of the contract can be so important in setting expectations. And, if the contract is really clear and the consequences of breach are really clear, maybe you can avoid going to a dispute. So I was wondering if, where the counterparty is a contractor, do you find it helpful to have adjudication boards or like standing tribunals that are available to determine disputes as they come up, or Or do you prefer something more traditional, as in you just have like an arbitration or a litigation clause in your contract?
Yeah, it's more traditional. We'd have a litigation clause in our contract, and if we negotiated enough, we might do something like arbitration. Generally, it would be mediation though, and then litigation as needed. But I'll be honest, we're also open to working with the other side to come up with a specific dispute resolution clause that fits each contract at each specific instance. Yeah.
What do you see as some of the advantages of mediation?
I think it's just good to be able to have an informal setting where somebody can help you resolve that dispute. And it's not quite like arbitration, where that's really, very much like litigation, and I think pits you guys against one another in many instances. A good mediator can really help you all to resolve this dispute by making clear to all the parties that you want to come to a resolution, right? That being said, it only works when you, one, have a really good mediator who knows that subject matter well, and two, you have parties who are willing to work with one another. I've seen a mediation where, if one side just doesn't want to deal, then it doesn't matter how good the mediator is. And also on the other side, if you've got a really bad mediator, it's hard to get parties that, even when they want to deal, to a good resolution.
Mm-hmm. And what do you see as the relative benefits of litigation and arbitration? And why might you favor litigation before arbitration?
Litigation is a public process, which can be helpful sometimes. It's also sort of a clear process of what you need to do. I think that, that's really one of the big benefits there. And also, in litigation, you can always switch to mediation. Like, that's a good thing, right? Like, you can pause litigation, you can use other different methods to work it out, you can negotiate during it. And arbitration, it's a little bit different. It's kind of like, I don't want to say going straight to trial, but in some ways, yes. Because in litigation, you've got all these different steps, right? Motion practice, extensive discovery, all these different things along the way, where you can actually, as part of the process, just pause everything and then say, you know what, let's just talk. Let's go to mediation. Let's have an informal conference. Let's do whatever it is. Because there are all those sort of points along the way where you can reevaluate.
And I think that flexibility in the dispute process is so important.
Mm-hmm. I want to learn, because as a litigator as well, so you can always fix things, and that whole process of litigation is so flexible. You can pause it and everything like that. Absolutely.
You mentioned your training as a litigator. Do you feel like going in-house, you appreciate or think about risk in a different way? Or has there been any difference to your approach to resolving disputes or preventing them altogether?
Gosh, that's a good question. So yes, I think what it opened my eyes to, at least from the litigation side, is, I know exactly what's going to happen if this dispute goes to litigation, right? The cost of it, the time involved in it. And I think, if anything, it makes me want to avoid litigation. That should be sort of a last resort, which is helpful. And also, frankly, what helps when you're in this big complex litigation is the strategy. That's really what distinguishes a good litigator from a great one, is somebody who really thinks about the strategy. Those same strategies that you use in litigation can be deployed in informal settings as well, right? Thinking about, when do I want to talk to the other person? How do I want to talk to them? What is the messaging going to be here? It's all very, very similar skills. You just deploy them in a different way.
What do you think are some best practices for in-house counsel and external counsel to be frequently talking together and coming up with that strategy and reevaluating that strategy at suitable junctures? What does a really good partnership look like?
Yeah, I think that you have to figure out what are the key goalposts along your path, to know your path, and then whenever there is something key happens that changes the the path you're going on, to sit down with one another and really talk about, okay, what's our strategy here, to really map that out. Because what I see sometimes in litigation, what I've seen before, is it's just a constant firefight. When you approach it that way, that's not going to work. The best way to do it is to have a comprehensive strategy that you revisit, at key points along the way. And you say, is this working? And also, just to know when it's going to be right. Sometimes in a big complex case, when you have a multi-phase trial, after phase one, you want to reevaluate. After each phase, you will do that. But also, even along the way, there are other key points, whether that be motions, whether that be, decisions by the company from a business standpoint, whatever it is. It's just important to keep that dialogue open, with your outside counsel if you're working with them, and to really understand that strategy, because it's too easy to sort of just get too caught up in the weeds of the dispute itself.
I wanted to return to your earlier comment about MP materials being in a highly regulated industry and the reality of working with like local government or different government departments in your work and resolving disputes in that regard. So all of the techniques that you already talked about, mediation, settlement, as regards government parties, are all these dispute prevention settlement techniques the same, or is it slightly different when you're dealing with regulators?
Sure. It's a little different with regulators because you really don't want to get to a dispute. You don't want it ever to be to that point. But I think what you would use that are some of the same tools in that toolbox are your communication tools, right? You want to be open and honest with these regulators as much as you can be, and to work with them, to know who's regulating you, to be, to keep those lines of communication open. Really what it does is it builds trust in one another and lets you understand, they understand how your business works, you understand what they're doing, because the law and the regulations themselves are not necessarily straightforward to follow. So there's always some, negotiation there and some back and forth there, and also working with one another. All of that's important to making sure that it doesn't grow into a dispute.
And I think the key word there is trust, building that rapport with your government counterparties. I'd like to take a slight pivot now into some reflections on your career. And my first question is, what's your advice to the younger generation of private practitioners in the ADR field?
Yeah, so my advice there is really to think, to be open to ADR. I think that in law school, oftentimes, you're trained to be a litigator. And then if you go into practice, you've got sort of transactional practices and litigation practices. And particularly for the litigators, to always be open to using that process, right? To using ADR, and to go into that process with an open mind and knowing that this is oftentimes the best path forward for your clients to come to a deal, just because, oftentimes litigation will just be too long and too expensive, and you won't even necessarily come out with a better outcome than you would if you just used a more informal ADR process. That's tough though, that's tough. I think sometimes they just want to go to war. And I've been there and I understand that, and being able to accept that that's not always the best way to go, that's something you have to learn early in your career.
Yeah, I think it's so important to learn to have the client mindset to resolving disputes, because so often external counsel might be focused on the parameters of the specific case in front of them, but really what may be more beneficial for the client is thinking about how do we help the client get back to business or to get back into a relationship with the counterparty. And it's great that we have so many tools at our disposal to help resolve disputes.
Absolutely.
My last question for you is, what is your advice for young practitioners who are looking to go in-house?
Yeah, so I think that if you want to go in-house, one, it's always good to build your network, right? Join these professional organizations that are part of your interest. That's important to do that. Make sure you make connections both in-house through those organizations, as well as with your own clients. And frankly, even more importantly, with the people at your own law firm. You never know when they're going to go in-house. And I think it's just sort of, keeping your ears to the ground and listening for those opportunities. because something will come up that you never even expected. For myself, I'll say that, I loved working at Alston & Bird. I love the work I did and the people that I worked with, but I was actually recruited by MP Materials and this company. I was so drawn to it by their mission to bring back this industry, this rare earth industry, to America, to help support the electrification of the country. That it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up, and I was really open to it, and I have not regretted it for a second.
I love that, being so excited about your company's mission. And actually, I interviewed an in-house counsel at Nestle, and she said the same thing. It's so important to be passionate about what your company does. I also think your advice on networking is really great. And for those who don't know, Clynton and I met actually through both serving as members of the CPR Y-ADR Steering Committee. And so with that, I'd love to thank you, Clynton, for your time and for the insights that you've shared. And I thank our audience for tuning in.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so great to be here today.
Thank you again, Clynton.